Good afternoon. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Key Chapple. I had heard of Dr. Key Chapple for maybe 5 years ago through Sāṃkhya. And what really inspired me about his work is how he was able to bring yoga teaching into mainstream academy, into universities. He's very successfully running a master's program in yoga studies in Loyola Marymount University for the past 15 years.
Certificates for 17 degree for 7.
Wow. Okay. So that's something that I have been dreaming about, to really bring yoga teaching into the academy. So I've been really inspired by it also. And I met him recently in June at the IOIT conference in LA. And so the prospect of him coming to Chennai in September, I said you should definitely visit Yogavāsiṣṭha and meet our students and maybe give us a talk. So welcome all of you. I think I'm not seeing any, very few new faces here, maybe one or two. Okay, all of you are familiar with Yogavāsiṣṭha and what we are doing. So if you want more information, you can always talk to us. I don't want to take more time talking about the institution. I'm going to invite Sundar to just give a small introduction to Dr. Chapple.
Good evening and a warm welcome to all of you. Also John Saracen welcoming Professor Key Chapple. We start with a small personal note. We first met in 2014 in Delhi and then Rishikesh. Traveled together to Rishikesh when we joined a program to study with Srivastava Swami Sir, the tradition of Krishnamacharya, and he had organized along with his students from very Loyola College, University. And he also gave a wonderful lecture there on Shunya in Jainism. It was a fantastic lecture and it was very inspiring. And then back home there was a lot of things were happening. I was not sure what to do. So I wrote to him asking, I want to study Nyaya, Vaiseshika and all that. So he promptly responded, writing that I should meet none other than his friend John Grimes, who teaches here, and he was a professor of philosophy and in religions. And I got to meet him, and it was a great journey since then. Even though I wanted to study with him, Nyaya, Vaiseshika and all that, he said, maybe we will discuss Advaita, which I didn't know about earlier. And it was a great journey after that. And John Grimes, if you don't know, he's an author of, and he wrote on Ramana Maharishi, The Crown Jewel of Advaita. So it's a fantastic book, and so I want to thank him for this note here. And also, Professor Chapple, let me just share a few words, some formal things about his credentials. Professor Key Chapple, as an Indologist and scholar of the non-Singh religions of India, namely Jainism, Buddhism, and Yoga. He studied comparative literature and religious studies at the State University of New York, and then Buddhism at Fordham University. His PhD is in the area of history of religions, and he has published numerous books, papers on the history and philosophy of Indian religions. He advises the International Summer School for Jain Studies, the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale, the Ahimsa Center, Pomana, and the Jain Studies Center at SOAS. He founded the Master's Program, as I mentioned, in yoga at Loyola Marymount University, where he is the Doshi Professor of Indian and Comparative Theology. And he's going to talk about Sāṃkhya and Yogavāsiṣṭha, the two important and ancient texts on yoga. I say yoga, when I say Sāṃkhya, I say yoga, because traditionally, Sāṃkhya was considered to be part of yoga studies. When we say Patanjali Yoga Darshanam, comprised of yoga sutras of Patanjali, Sāṃkhya Kārikā, and also the bhāshya of the Yoga Sutras. So one of the key elements in Sāṃkhya and the Yogavāsiṣṭha will be very important for students of yoga and people who are interested in yoga. So I invite Key Chapple to deliver this lecture, and also I want to mention that Yogavāsiṣṭha Foundation is planning to run a series of lectures once every month, and this will be the first in the series. Thank you.
Well, I'm so honored to be here with you. Let me know what I need to adjust, or if I'm all gizmoed up. So one of the interesting adventures of coming to India is avoiding these plastic chairs. They're so not good for you. So I will...
Do you want us to remove it?
No, it is fine. I will sit sometime. But they really are not ergonomically very healthy. So, and I'm very happy that they're here, because they also have allowed so many people with difficulty in sitting on the floor to be able to be in the room with everyone else. So I'm happy for the chair, I'm happy for not the chair. And I want also to just express my humility. I think some of you caught a glimpse, and again, computers come and go, but I wanted to share a little darshan of the woman who brought me fully into yoga. And when I was in high school, I started on my own the practice of asana under the guidance of a Buddhist teacher. I had started the practice of meditation. And then through some rather remarkable events, one happening after another, through my dreams, I had encountered a very, very special woman whose picture you saw fleetingly there. And then in my first year of university, when I was studying Sanskrit, I was introduced to her. I had to travel 400 miles to know that she was real, and then I had to move 400 miles and became part of a community established in 1972, the year that I met her, and trained in classical yoga. And through those many wonderful 12 years, I got married soon thereafter, and my wife and I, she's not able to be with me tonight, she was just too wiped out by the journey. But she and I studied together at Stony Brook University, studied Sanskrit. I also studied Tibetan. She went on to do her master's thesis on theories of education in Aurobindo, Gandhi, and Tagore. And we're delighted we will be spending a couple of nights in Oroville, which I had visited before, but this will be her first time. And then I went out and did a PhD in, as was mentioned, history of religions, and focused specifically on the Yogavāsiṣṭha, which you'll hear more about tonight. Now, this mix of life and scholarship and work has been really quite a blessing. And I remember one evening at a yoga class that I was observing, Guruma Dharanyanjali said to me, you have three things you need to uphold. One is your family, one is your work, and one is your spiritual life. And I felt those words were so special to me, and they remain special, and it's true of everyone. That we have work in the world, we have our knowledge life that we must attend to, and we have our families. And one of the beautiful things about the yoga tradition is that it makes room for everybody, and it makes room for people literally from all walks of life, of all religious persuasions, and all callings to be part of the yoga family. And as this journey, which it seems so hard to believe it goes by so quickly, and I was so heartened to be reminded of our time together up in Rishikesh. It was not an easy journey, but we certainly learned a great deal always from Srivatsa Ramaswamy, who many of you know. And what we do as we go through life gathering experiences is every once in a while take time to reflect why this is happening, how this is happening, remember where it's happening, and then by entering into that interrogative mode, we continue to be philosophers. And this is really the best of human tasks, as Socrates has told us. And we also know that, and again, the unexamined life is perhaps not worth living. So that as much as we can avail ourselves of opportunities to think and reflect, we become improved and we become of greater service to others. So just a couple of highlights of memory pieces, particularly of Chennai and of the venerable history of so much given by this city. We're about 4 kilometers from the Adyar Library, and if you've not been, please make pilgrimage. And Joy Mills, who was for some years the head of the Theosophical Society and in residence here, was a dear friend. And as you may know, that Krishnamurti, who comes from this town, had lived for many, many years in Ojai, California. And though I only heard him speak once, and it was here in India, his ripple effect continues. And the Theosophical Society, which had originally discovered him, continues to flourish in its own quiet way. And they have been such an affirming presence within my life for many, many, many years. And I also want to lift up Krishnamacharya. And he, of course, again, was a gift to the world of this city and returned to this city after his retirement. And for 30 years, he was the supervisor of the work of Srivatsa Ramaswamy. And when we learn the history of the short years that he actually had with the other very more famous students, such as Pattabhi Jois and Mr. Iyengar, I think we all can be grateful that we still have the living presence of Srivatsa Ramaswamy. And when I first met Srivatsa Ramaswamy some 15, 16 years ago in Santa Monica, California, he had been invited to do a lecture at YogaWorks. Now, I'm going to give you a really quick thumbnail history of yoga, which you know, but it's always good to remember where we are in this flow of time. Swami Vivekananda, again, had passed through Tamil Nadu and gone out to Vivekananda Rock, as it's now called, and had his vision that, yes, I will accept the invitation to go to the Parliament of the World's Religions. He traveled to Chicago in 1893, and he spoke forth to the world the truths of Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Karma Yoga, and actually wrote the book Raja Yoga, which is his encapsulation of the Yoga Sutra while living in California. Then, some years later, Paramahansa Yogananda, from a bit north of here, settled in California, lived out his days there, taught yoga for 32 years in Los Angeles before passing away in 1952 at the Biltmore Hotel. There's still an annual pilgrimage to the very room where he left his body, which is a shrine for followers of Paramahansa Yogananda. And there was also an unfortunate event the very same year that he landed in the United States. In 1920, the United States suffered from severe xenophobia and closed down migration. Many of you have relatives in the United States of America. This would not have been possible without, and this is his 150th year anniversary, without Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi so deeply inspired the civil rights movement of the United States of America that not only were African Americans former descendants of former slaves and some former slaves themselves allowed to vote in 1965 in abundance for the first time, but the civil rights legislation also guaranteed equal entry for immigrants from all over the globe. So your very brilliant physician and engineer relatives in great numbers began to settle in states. The United States has not been the same since. For 30 years, the Indian American community is the most educated, the most wealthy, the most amazing group of people ever to have been added to the American population, and this is something to celebrate. And at the same time, it's a signal to the world, at least in America, that, yeah, this yoga is okay. And in addition to those brilliant physicians and engineers, in addition to the brothers-in-law who were sponsored in and ran so many of the small businesses, the hotel patels that you may know about, and the mini marts, okay, that you know about from The Simpsons, okay. In addition, there were a handful of great yoga teachers that were able to settle for the first time since 1920 in the United States. And that handful included Swami Rama of the Himalayas. It included Swami Satchidananda, a direct disciple of Swami Shivananda. It included Amrit Desai. It also included Jyotirmayananda, another direct disciple of Shivananda. And then in that same group in the 60s that came over was my own yoga teacher, who was the only woman amongst them, who was raising a family and always held her operation to quite a small size. But as we, as teenagers, literally very, very young people, gathered to learn from her, we also saw the need for learning all we could learn about ourselves, Svadhyaya, as well as to learn all of the foundations of this amazing philosophy and psychology that we call yoga. We still have a small storefront ashram. She is no more, yet people who studied with her carry on the work in various parts of the country and on Long Island, in Amityville, New York, on the South Shore. And we took it upon ourselves to go to university, to go seek out graduate degrees. And we also convened study groups. And for a full year, on Wednesday nights, we met and we read the Sāṃkhya Kārikā. Now, is it Sundar, okay, Sundar. He mentioned Yogavāsiṣṭha, right? Yogavāsiṣṭha, think clearly and know about the material world. Okay, this is the engineer's dream, and the reason why India has given the world so many wonderful engineers, including IT engineers, is because they have those two things figured out for thousands of years, that you've got to be able to understand the premises upon which you make your decisions, and you have to know the materiality with which you work. And right in the beginning, and recall, we're all teenagers. Okay? We're in college, but we're attempting to launch ourselves into something that was very difficult. Again, another highlight Chennai Madras moment was being welcomed by the then chair of the philosophy department into the office of Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, who then went on to become your vice president. And it was his source book of Indian philosophy we used in order to read the Sāṃkhya Kārikā, in order to have many of the Yoga Sutras, in order to read passages from the Rig Veda, from the Upanishads. So, as we grappled with this text, we, right at the very beginning, were given an important insight. And the insight is that the reason people take up that interrogative quest, that philosophical journey, is because they suffer. But rather than pronouncing, rather globally and universally, as did the Buddha, sarvam dukkam, the author, Ishvara Krishna, of the Sāṃkhya Kārikā said, well, what is this suffering? Said it happens in three ways. It happens because people are mean to us. Okay? There are people that are trouble, right? So things happen out there done by other people to us. We suffer. Two, we suffer because of our own history. We suffer because, as human beings with a sukshma sharira, as human beings with this linga, this vestige of unknown, generally unknowable impulse and collections of impulses, that we just sometimes are, as the phrase has it, our own worst enemy. Samskara, vasana, klishtakama. And three, and here it's really interesting, because it used to be in the old days, when climatic crisis struck, we could say, oh, that's an act of God. There's things that happen, and we have no control over volcanoes, we have no control over earthquakes. But as the years have gone by, climate is not unrelated to human greed. With a shift toward global warming, we're seeing extreme weather events that are hitherto really undocumented, unknown. And we're also learning that even things such as earthquake clusters can, in fact, be caused by human intervention, particularly oil drilling. But nonetheless, we're still left with things happening over which we don't have any control, and we need to be mindful of that. He said, he admitted, there are three ways to try to get around that suffering. And the first one is one that, it's sort of sad. I live in Huskas Village, and those of you who know Delhi, it's like a nightclub spot. And some young people particularly will go through a phase where they will just intoxicate themselves, thinking that that giddy moment that they feel somehow is a moment of freedom. And old people like me know certainly this is not the case. And most young people have to go through something like that experience to sort that out. But Ishvara Krishna states straight up that drugs are an insufficient method for obtaining freedom for suffering. Right? Drugs don't work. Second, he has a scathing critique, and all apologies to those who love Ganesh Chaturthi and all of the holidays that are coming, Navratri soon. He says that rituals are insufficient, and he spares no criticism, and he says that they are ineffective because they don't last that long, they can create a good mood, but they actually are really expensive, and at least in the old days, and in some places even today, it requires the killing of a lot of animals. So he says, okay, drugs not good, ritual not good. And then the third thing And this is where, as yogis, we have to be rather reflective and ask, how does this pertain to us? He says that even samadhi is insufficient. And I think you wouldn't be in this room if you had not had a moment, a glimpse, an invitation into that exuberance and excitement of sometimes it'll last a little bit longer than others, but there's this moment where everything is the way it should be. In the Rig Veda, it was referred to by two names. One was Rita, and the other is Dehe. And that Dehe became Samadhi. And Patanjali gives this amazing system to bring one into samadhi. The Buddha gave this amazing system, systematically reflecting through mindfulness of the elements, mindfulness of body, breath, emotions, and the Buddha's teachings to be able to bring people into this state of samadhi. And he said, that's nice. But if you're not able to return to the world with abhyasa, with a practice that allows you to then encounter in the non-samadhi states all that inevitably you will encounter, I don't want to use the word phony, but you're just not going to be durable. There has to be a basic outlook, a basic orientation that gives you the strength and the grounding, the stability. The Bhagavad Gita calls it prajna, that stabilized wisdom that allows you to move through the ups and downs, the ebb and flow, the joy and the sorrow that inevitably flows and flows and flows. So we studied this text, and it was, and I'm going to come back and we're going to go through some of its basic principles. It was very difficult. And we only came to realize some years later that we were being taught it not only in our philosophical reading and discussion, but we were being taught Sāṃkhya inferentially. And I'm going to give some tips on how you yourself can prepare yourself rather than just top down from bottom up. Prepare yourselves for inferentially embodying the truths offered by Sāṃkhya. Now I'm going to come back to Sāṃkhya, but I want to jump forward just a little bit and talk about what was going on at the university. So at the university, and for 6 years I had classroom Sanskrit. We read Buddhist literature in Sanskrit and Tibetan. We read the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit. We read Yoga Sutra in Sanskrit and commentary. We read Upanishads in Sanskrit. We read Brahma Sutra commentary by Nimbarka, pieces of it in Sanskrit. And with all of the conversations and all of the speculations, one question, when I was about 21 years old, just kept on disturbing me. Okay? And the question was, and it's a really good question for everybody, is there a self? If there is a self, who is the self? Again, Tamil Nadu, I can't say that without reflecting on the beautiful portrait upstairs of Ramana Maharshi. And if you've not been to Arunachala, how many of you have been to Arunachala? Take the trip, because it's all there. You just have, I have it on my iPad. I don't know if the iPad works anymore, but it's all there. He just lays it all out, that what you have to do is just ask that question. And as you ask that question, it doesn't matter if you're a Buddhist, or a Hindu, or a Jain, or a Christian, or a Muslim, or a Jew, or a Zoroastrian, or a Confucian, or just simply when you strip away all of the things that are not, you're left with this radiance beyond description. But that's not how it felt when we were reading the Tibetan critiques of the stupid Hindus that think there's this thing the size of your thumb in the heart. Okay? And it wasn't the case when we would read the Hindu criticism of those Buddhists who don't believe in anything at all. And these conversations, as abstract as they sound, are actually quite interesting. And they play out sociologically, they play out historically, they play out in, well, why did Hinduism survive? Why did Jainism survive in India? But Buddhism really just sort of went elsewhere. Okay, all of those things. Really interesting questions that have nurtured my mind and heart for many, many years. And one school of Buddhism that I learned of from a Swiss Buddhologist called Yogavāsiṣṭha particularly captured my imagination. And in this school, the phrase from the Vibhanta Madhyamaka commentary is, one of the phrases is, there is nothing other than mind. Chitta matra. Chitta matra, or vijñāna vada. Now many of you know about the koshas, and they are mentioned briefly in the Upanishads. They are really given fullest expression, perhaps, in the Abhidharma literature of the Buddhists, the Karma Grantha literature of the Jains, and in the Sāṃkhya Kārikā and its commentaries in Indian Hindu traditions. And we have our thinking mind, and it's easy enough to say, oh, whatever it is that I'm thinking about, it's really not that important. And we also have our emotional ground. And in Sāṃkhya, this is called buddhi. I have it all written down for you, which I will share, so don't worry too much. We'll be moving this through, and you know these words a little bit already, and it'll be all reinforced. And it's in the buddhi, in the bhāva realm, in the realm of the klishta karma bijas, the seeds of afflicted karma, that we think we are really who we are. And what meditation does, what Yogavāsiṣṭha, particularly through its work with the fascia, cleanses, allows first recognition of, oh my gosh, this is happening again, whether it be mental, physical, or emotional, and allows through, and I'm going to call this is extra canonical, but I'm going to call it self-grace. I'm translating a text from the 6th century, it's called the Yoga Bindu, and it says again and again and again, nobody can do it for you. Okay? Who can do it? You can do it. The irony is, it's the you that's doing it is the you that you need to get over, but that's a paradox, and that's why the Buddhists love to hate Sāṃkhya, because it leaves us with that paradox. Okay? So this chitta matra vijñāna vada, like our emotional mental state, prompting every engagement within the physical realm, requires our attention, our understanding, requires yoga asana, requires yoga pranayama, requires yoga dharana, jnana, and samadhi. in order to be brought to a place of quiet, from which one can then reemerge. So I ran into, and again, these things just sort of happen serendipitously, but I discovered in Dasgupta's multi-volume History of Indian Philosophy, and from one of my professors who grew up in Bangalore, who was the co-founder of Christ University in Bangalore, which is really a great institution, was professor at Fordham University, and introduced us to this amazing work of Dasgupta. There's 80 pages in there devoted to the Yogavāsiṣṭha, and I never heard of it before. Everybody knows the Yoga Sutra, everybody knows the Bhagavad Gita, pretty much everybody in India knows the Yogavāsiṣṭha. When I was young, it was my first introduction, so I said, this is the book for me. And I found right toward the beginning this series of chapters that takes all of those phrases from Vajrayana Buddhism and puts them in service of the discovery of self. Furthermore, it reiterates what my own teacher had taught, was that there's no one that can do it for you. In fact, again, a little sociology and a little bit of history. There was a moment in the 70s, and then the 80s, and then it got a little bit bigger in the 90s after the original teacher had passed. But there was a teacher who will remain nameless, who was very good with peacock feathers. And people would just flock to get hit with the peacock feathers and be put into Shaktipat. And these people would come and say, well, why don't you put me into Shaktipat? And Guruma, our teacher, would say, that's for you to figure out, number one. And number two, to impose a state of bliss on someone else is an act of violence. Act of violence. Act of violence. And I was like, oh, she's on her own, you know, and it was like, yeah, she's the mother who wants her kids to grow up and doesn't want them to just get addicted to experiences that may or may not, like from Ishvara Krishna we know, yes, you can have a samadhi, doesn't mean you're going to be happy in an enduring way. And she really was building philosophy, was really building a community of philosophers, teaching philosophy, teaching the Yoga system. So this text brought great joy to me philosophically. And then some years later, I was invited, someone had remembered, because I hadn't worked on it for more than 15 years, and someone remembered that I had done this, and there was a renewed interest on this particular text at the University of Hawaii. And we started a project, and my interlocutor there, Professor Arindam Chakrabarti, who is now the Mato Professor of Indian Philosophy back at Stony Brook, where I had originally studied, where I had studied. He said, look at these chapters from the Yogavāsiṣṭha on specifically the dharanas. And one of the joys that I'll share with you, and we're going to go back, we're going to revisit Sāṃkhya from a slightly different perspective informed by Yogavāsiṣṭha, and then we're going to move forward into a different part of the Yogavāsiṣṭha. But I want to share with you October 1973, November 1973, December, January, and February. Okay? And fairly random, arbitrary, it was just how the schedule lined up. But when I discovered Granianjali, it was through a classmate who was receiving sadhana, weekly sadhana. And it was in speaking with this classmate about her weekly sadhana that I first connected with the word ahimsa. And every week, as yoga training, the students at Yoga Anand Ashram were given a yama and a niyama to practice, to think about, to actualize, and to journal. And I was very attracted to the idea of ahimsa. The United States was engaged quite tragically in an unjust war. It seems the United States is always engaged in unjust wars, unneeded wars. But that's the Eisenhower story. He warned, and he said, be wary of the military-industrial complex, it's addictive. And one of the saddest sort of points of recent South Asian history is that the United States, for decades, has been impoverishing the people of Pakistan by selling them armaments that are very expensive. And Pakistan wants to be the equal of India in all things. And Pakistan has this many people, India has this many people, so they have to take all of their money and put it there. And the one statistic I learned, again, I'm sorry if I'm free associating, but it's all yoga to me. And what happened at the time of independence in 1947, the whole subcontinent literacy was about 25%. In India now, and I've seen it in my lifetime, when I came it was probably 50 or 60%, my first visit in 1981, long before most of you were born. And now it's 75% and still climbing. And in Pakistan, it's still pretty stuck at about 25%. And this means a loss of human potential in so many, many different ways. So Gandhi's message of ahimsa, taken to heart by the leaders of the civil rights movement, taken to heart by the many people of good faith who protested this constant involvement at that time in the Vietnam War. Before that it was the Korean War. America got addicted to war because of the successes of World War II, as horrendous as those successes proved to be. And this legacy is not as direct. In other words, the body count is nowhere near what it was 70 years ago on an annual basis, but the resources and the mentality continue to be afflicted by this notion that permanent conflict must be perpetuated. So I was just thrilled with this way of taking something that to me was a political commitment into a directly personal lifestyle observation. So the vegetarianism started, and in our own community, eventually we had a vegetarian restaurant for 25 years. We had a bookstore and a community education center. Okay, you could do all sorts of things when you start a yoga place. You know, it's really, the sky's the limit, and the earth will always be there to support. We had an art gallery, which was great. So, October, November, December, January, February. Our sadhana, in addition to pranayama and asana, in addition to following yama and niyama, every morning was to begin 20 minutes. Every evening was to wrap up 20 minutes of going outside. Only had to do this once, but at the beginning of it, go outside, find a plate you didn't really care about, get earth, put that earth on the plate, and look at that earth. Very simple instructions. And I have a new book that'll be coming out. It's called Living Landscapes, Meditation on the Five Elements in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain Yogas. And this is my tribute to this training. And I found the Garanda Samhita, gives the very specific instructions on how to do this. The Pukasati Sutta of the Buddha talks about how the Buddha taught this practice simply in one night to a young man who unfortunately died the next day. But the Buddha declared he did it so well, totally free, don't feel bad for him, he went to nirvana. And then the Jains have a different take on it, where they observe it and then they change the order a little bit in a very beautiful way. And of course, the Vedas have much to say about the 5 great elements. And there's passages from the Prithvi Sutta, a little bit from the Upanishads. So, the next month, and we didn't really know, because again, we were being taught all of this inferentially. And one of the great things about the Sāṃkhya Kārikā, it says the best knowledge of all is inferential knowledge. Okay, it's something that isn't obvious at first. It's something that you don't know because someone told you it's so, but it's something that you have experienced and that you have learned it truly because you've tried it out. Second month was water. We simply sat with water. Third month was fire. We sat for 20 minutes with a kindled flame. Fourth month was, I think, now we have like this control over Vayu that is spooky, like sort of weird. But we also need it to survive, particularly as the climate changes. But thank goodness we have the fan, right? Thank goodness we do have the possibility of AC. And what we would do is just sit and gaze out the window and watch as the wind made its presence known. And we would inhabit, and this is one of the great practices conveyed by Paramahansa, rather not, well I guess he is a little bit of Paramahansa, but the pranayama of Sri Ramaswamy, I mean that goes into places that require really sustained attention. And then space, and just simply acknowledging the immediate space, acknowledging the emotional space, acknowledging the space between things, acknowledging the vastness of space, acknowledging the 4 directions. And all of this building from the very stuff of human experience in intimacy with the building blocks of our reality. The Yogavāsiṣṭha has a chapter dedicated to each, and it just brought joy to my heart. The Yogavāsiṣṭha, we have 2 great Sanskritists in North America. One is Phyllis Granoff, who is now at Yale. The other is Fred Smith in Iowa, who now has residence up above Dehradun. And they both confided in me independently, secretly, when they found out that I had done Yogavāsiṣṭha. They said, "That's the most beautiful text. That's what I go to just for pure pleasure." And good luck translating it, because we would never try to do that. So, but I'll be sharing perhaps some verses where I tried. But the text, the original, is so amazingly gorgeous. Now, I'm not sure that I have enough, but I'm going to circulate these through the room, and perhaps I'll need to hold one, but perhaps some of you will need to share. Okay. Thank you. Now, one of the things that we've discovered with our clinical studies in the United States, my colleague Dr. Lori Rubenstein-Fazio, is that visualization has a tremendous health effect. And I myself went through this with her. All of us have a story we can tell about our bodies, and as you get older, the story gets more so. And my right side of the body would, like, this would go out, that would go out, this would go out, that would go out, this would get swollen, this would and I forget, I think it was a hip or a knee, I forget. But I went through a visualization sequence with Lori where you just do Shambhava Mudra, where you, again, this is from the Hatha Yoga text, where you visualize a time when this was not a problem, and then your body sort of catches on. And it was lovely. So the title of this is Outlook as Yoga Therapy. And again, I'm trying to do this inferentially, so I'm going to be giving some examples, but it will be up to you to find out in your own life what will bring you to a place of greater wholeness. And then my hats go off to you who are planning to become yoga therapists, because that is the greatest challenge of all. And again, it has to be from pratibha, it has to be from intuition, and this may be a somewhat useful tool, but it may be only an indirect usefulness. Am I making some sense? So, Sāṃkhya. I love Sāṃkhya. I just spent the day before yesterday with someone who did his PhD on Yogavāsiṣṭha, which is a commentary on Sāṃkhya Kārikā. And we were just rejoicing at the cleanness of the Sāṃkhya Kārikā. I've already told you, no use for ritual, no use for medicine, better or worse. Acknowledgement that, bad things happen. And what are, regardless of anything else, the two constants of human experience? And the two constants of human experience are you and me. And you in relationship to the other you, and the me in relationship to the other me. And this relationship is core and key to every single experience. And what Ishvara Krishna does so deftly, and what Patanjali does a little bit more religion-friendly, is to say that to understand how the human operates in the world, and how the world operates in the human, is the gateway to our freedom. As Guru Ma would say, first, we must seek understanding. With understanding comes acceptance. With acceptance comes peace. And in peace, we find our freedom. And how beautiful to be invited as a teenager to understand the earth. Because as I sat there, okay, so I'd moved 400 miles, right? Uprooted from my family. My girlfriend and I were not yet married, and we were like, what? We're just teenagers, right? And I'm having to negotiate a whole new university. I'm having to negotiate a whole new culture. Because just as, I say I'm going south, and then the people in the north say, oh, you're going south. And then the people in the north say, oh, who are you? You're living in Delhi, right? I mean, just everybody, that thing. But it's a real thing in New York State, because when you're up as far as I was near Niagara Falls and Lake Ontario, out in the country, speaking with this somewhat now tamed accent, and you move to New York City, where people speak words like coffee, that you don't know what they're saying, instead of what I would say coffee, and of course, everyone thinks their accent is the most beautiful accent. But I've never did. I've always felt a little bit embarrassed. But anyway, grappling with all this. And then I was just given the solace of looking at her. And I walked down to the end of the block, suburban tract, and there was a farm. And it was October. So the first frost was about to hit. And Long Island still has truck farms where vegetables are grown and then taken to market. And it was a field of onions. And I noticed the onions as I was digging out some dirt to take back into my rented room. So as I looked at that dirt, I couldn't help but think about onions. And then it was October, which means that this is the time when the leaves fall. Autumn, in that climate and environment. And then you couldn't help reflect about how the leaves fall and they turn into humus and how that returns to the soil. And then I couldn't help walking through the nature preserve on the way to the bus that goes through another nature preserve to the classroom buildings with these trees, these rather remarkable oak trees growing up out of the sandy loam of Long Island, were themselves an expression of that very earth. And then food. It was no longer an abstraction to say, Om Shanti on the food, but it was like, oh, good to eat. Books. And what is this? A tree gave up his life. Or kapok, or whatever substance is being used for paper in India now. All of that just created a rapport and intimacy, a love for the stuff that is us. The Sāṃkhya system posits two interfacing energies, Purusha and Prakriti. Their co-presence allows the flourishing of all experience, individual and collective, sullied and sublime. As Prakriti, known by as many names as there are names of goddesses, and we know there are lots of names of goddesses, as Prakriti performs her dance for the sake of the ever-present witness, the whole human drama unfolds. The human drama takes us from the moment of the first flaring forth, the first cry emitted as the baby emerges from the womb, to the last whimper, the last breath. In between, the human person lives so many births, compiling and destroying, emitting and releasing experience after experience after experience. And the question comes, how can one find rest, peace, repose? According to the Sāṃkhya Kārikā, freedom can only be known through reflection on the constituents of reality, the 25 tattvas. Ritual will not suffice. Drugs are not enough. Even repeated states of spiritual ecstasy are not sufficient. Starting from the foundation, one can walk the path of yoga through knowledge of. So I'd like you all, as you're able, to please stand. And we're going to walk the path of Sāṃkhya. And you can leave your sheets, because you'll have them, and it's all there. And there's a wonderful Jhana yoga pose called Kayo Sarva. So if you could just lift one leg and shake it, lift the other leg and shake it, lift one elbow and shake it, lift the other elbow and shake it. And I did this Kayot-sarga with a physiotherapist from Qatar when I was teaching in Pune a few days ago. And he became quite distressed because he said, I don't think I can stand this way. And then I just talked him through it and added one other piece. And he said, oh, okay, I think I'm going to be okay. But even standing, from Samasthiti, can be terrifying for people. And in the Jain tradition, what they observe is a period of standing every day called Kayot-sarga, which means the utsarga, the uplift presentation of the body. So bring a little bit, this is a little bit of an Aikido move also, a little bit of Japanese body culture, but just bring a little bit of looseness and spring to your knees. And then bring a little bit of looseness and spring to your elbows. And lift your sternum. And then tuck your tailbone just a little bit so that you almost feel like you're about to sit down. And then allow your chin to come a little bit level so that your head is about as tall as it can be. And then do a check-in. Release your toes, feel the arches in your feet, feel your heels connect with the floor, your metatarsus. Feel that spring that comes with the knees. Feel the dynamism of your tailbone moving its way to the earth. You feel the earth as it supports you up to that tailbone. Then bring your shoulders down the back of your rib cage and lifting the sternum, bringing the chin ever so gently toward the sternum. And then feel those elbows a little bit as if you're a scarecrow, mindful of the crows that are making a racket outdoors. And relax your abdomen. Relax all the musculature of your face, your cheekbones, the muscles around your ears, your eyebrows, your forehead, and all the many muscles of your scalp. And then gently take your hands and put them behind you onto your buttocks. And just feel your palm with all of its nerve endings on your buttocks with all of its nerve endings. And then without actually sitting down, feel how this part of your anatomy connects so profoundly with the earth. And we'll say 5 times the word for earth, which is Prithvi. Prithvi, 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 Prithvi. And then bring your hands to the front of your hips. Place your thumbs under your rib cage a bit. Sort of visualize the wateriness of all dwelling from your belly button south, kidneys and back, spleen, the intestines, the urethra, your fingers close to the fold of your groin. And visualize that just as the water the monsoon piles up onto the streets, so also in the human body the water finds its way both internally through the veins of the body and finds exit through the urethra. We'll say 5 times the word for water. We'll choose one of the words, which is jal. Jal, 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 jal. And take your hands and put them on your belly. Feel the heat of your body, feel the heat of the room. And open your eyes slightly and take in some of the light. We'll say 5 times the word for Agni. Ready? Agni, 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 Agni. Bring your hands to your clavicle, to your chest. And inhale, and as you inhale, lift your elbows. And exhale, elbows down. Inhale. And down. And inhale. And down. We'll say 5 words. Say the word for air 5 times, the word vayu. Vayu, 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 vayu. And now bring your fingers behind your neck and bring the base of your palm to the front of your neck. And feel that place, that space of speech, that space through which we manifest a desire into reality through the power of voice, which fills and fulfills. And we'll say 5 times the word for space, which is Akash. Akash, 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 Akash. And release your arms. Then bring your hands to your nose and say, smelling earth with the nose, smelling earth with the nose. Everybody just once, smelling earth with the nose. And then bring your hands back down to your bottom and acknowledge how your very body can create and return to earth stuff that it doesn't need through the hands. Then bring your hands back up to your face and place your fingers on your lips and say, tasting flavor with mouth. Tasting flavor with mouth. And then put your hands again on the front and acknowledge that through that lower part of your body you emit fluids and that you connect with that watery part. Bring your hands to your eyes and cover them, and then release them and look forward and take in the color, take in the form, and say, seeing form with the eyes. Seeing form with the eyes. And then take your hands and rub them together. And then just sort of offer them, offering the heat of desire through the action of the hands. Then take your skin, and for Digambara monks, this is how they bathe, okay? And just say, touching with the skin, touching with the skin. And I'd like to also reflect how this relates to our air. Our largest internal organ is the lungs, and our largest external organ is the skin. Beautiful. And then lift one foot, lift the other. Walk in place and say, moving with the feet. Moving with the feet. And then, again, touch like this. Then take your little finger, put it at your ears. We'll say, hearing sound with the ears.
Hearing sound with the ears.
Speaking with the voice.
Speaking with the voice.
Release. And you can sit down again. And perhaps we want to bring some coolness back in. Are you feeling well? It's okay? Okay, that's good. I don't want people to suffer. So, when I heard that I had to learn 25 tattvas, I was like, no, I'm an American. I can only memorize 7 things. And then we got cell phones, so now every American has to learn, as Indians have always been able to do. We have to learn 10 things, okay? Because 10 numbers are required now. We cheat because we have that area code, but when I see these Indian cell phone numbers, I'm like, what? And I have to divide it 334, okay? That 55, even that's hard for me. But what it took, and it literally took me years, and part of what is in this book that will be actually available in April is that I developed a sequence of asana that is tied to the body and the senses. So I'll just run through it really quickly. You can visualize it. The Danur on your belly is Prithvi. Shalabha, when you're lifting your legs up and back of you, is Jal, because you're lifting your Jal stuff up. Agni is straight arm Nagasana. Then Vayu is the bent arm Nagasana. And then Sphinx, or supported plank, whatever you want to call it, becomes Akash. So every morning, that's my routine. And when I've taught this in yoga teacher training, that's what I suggest. Keep it interesting, because asana without philosophy is just exercise. And this is one mnemonic. It's not canonical in any way, but it's one way to invite people in to this inferential way of regarding the sacred relationship between self and world. So then the question becomes, what are the other 5? And I'll review what we did. We did the Pancha Mahabhutas, the 5 great elements. They're all on your sheet there. We did the Tanmatras, which are said only to be really known by the yogi, but you're all yogis. And it's the capacity to smell, the capacity to taste, the capacity to see, the capacity to touch, the capacity to hear. Then it's your Buddhindriyas, your physical vehicle for doing those things, your nose, your mouth, your eyes, your skin, and your ears. And then it's the physical manifestation where we engage. And we engage through our pooping, you have to be at least somewhat regular. Through our peeing, okay, you have to be able to pee, or you got to get dialysis. Okay, so this is therapy, and as much as we can appreciate these functions, the better off we are. Then our capacity to take and to give. Wow, amazing. A later Dharma, though, was to just simply observe the breaths. So beautiful. Action, the feet, the legs, the action organ of movement, and then, as the Rig Veda has it, the queen of all of the goddesses, which is our voice, which is Saraswati, which is Vash, which is, in English, voice and vocabulary, and evoke and provoke, all of these great words that are identical with that amazing goddess. So those are the 20. Now, it really can't get more interesting than that. Okay, that's all you need. But what happens is that in stringing this meditatively, you're automatically putting the mind into the place of ekagrita. Ekagrita. Okay, you're holding on to one thing in sequence, but holding on to the earth. Holding on, looking at the clear receptacle of water. And then allowing, like, oh, Bari, Pani, Agua, oh, you know, all of the water, fire, energy. Thank goodness. India is starting to wean its way off coal. And thank goodness, municipal power all through India is now becoming pretty reliable. And that's really good because it means that you don't need a generator because the generator is highly polluting. Right? So all of these connectivities. One of the great moments early when I was sitting with Burma is she said, now it's interesting because if America could just go back to a 1970s lifestyle, and if India could maintain what is now legitimately a 1970s American lifestyle, no problem. Okay? And all of these things began to creep in from the 70s, particularly into the 80s. And one of them, and it's twofold. There's this mania now, unfortunately, my own children were sort of part of this, of sports. And organized football teams, what we call in states soccer, cricket, you know, and how long can you play cricket? Till it's dark. But they came up with these amazing, powerful, electric-driven lights that destroy the whole sky and allow these kids to keep playing until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. And I remember the first time Gurma saw one of those, she said, I don't know if that's a good idea. Those lights rob the power of the sun. And think of that. I mean, on the one hand, you know, we lose our biorhythm. On the other hand, we burn all of this oil and gas and coal to generate that light. And on the other hand, we really rob our children of just being kids. Because there they are, being bossed around by some adult, do this, do that. You know, it's a little bit of loss. Okay, so then, inferentially, backwards. Okay, so what is the key here? The key is to be able to focus your mind. The key is to be able to get your mind on board. Yeah, I'm going to do this 20 minutes in the morning. I'm going to do this 20 minutes at night. But then the mind says, oh, but I don't have time for that. The mind says, oh, do I have to give up my asana to make time for that? The mind says, you know, and thank goodness, being a teenager, you just sort of sometimes do what you're told and fit it in. College is actually not a bad time to be a sadhaka. So the mind operates all of those senses. And behind the mind is this ahamkara. This self that, if you're a yoga person, has moved into that philosophical place of why, how, where, when, what is going on here place, so that the ahamkara can be devoted to sadhana. And, as I mentioned earlier, the ahamkara also says, oh, but I got to make a living. This is what brought Saras to yoga. And she got a job in yoga, that's great. And I got to have a living. And then the mind also, the self, the ahamkara, the ego self says, oh, but I got to have pleasure, I got to have wealth, I've got to have purpose, I have to have all of these things of the world. And that's where we begin to feel the pain. Like, you have to show up, which means that, at least in America, you have to take turns making coffee. And it is a little bit, you get spoiled as an American coming to India because you have so many people to do things for you. But it's done with a tenderness. It's done with a tenderness. But nonetheless, I was so sad being in Delhi because some of these families, their children have to commute from Noida to Gurgaon. It's 2 hours each way. This is New York of the 1980s. And why are they doing this? Because this is what you do now. And the joint household is sort of disappearing. And on the one hand, yeah, you want to be your own person. On the other hand, it makes life more difficult. It makes it a little bit easier, but it makes life more difficult. And again, consumption, consumption, consumption. New York Times today ran this ad about the tremendous drop of the Indian economy. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure that this is going to be as horrible as people think it is, but car sales are down 32%. Yay! Etc. Right? I mean, Aparigraha was the go-to place for Gandhi. And when they called it the integrated growth, it was not without a philosophy behind it. And globalism and capitalism, as enticing as and fun as it can be, and yoga certainly become part of that, has its limits. And this is something that India will adapt to. I think the ups and downs, people are going to keep going. In America, it's a different story, but America too is asking more philosophical questions, but inseparable, really, from the illness and the illness. So then the question becomes, what are the drives? What pushes people to want that perfect job? What pushes people to either be compliant or not? And this is the work of the philosopher. This is the work of probing the Vijñānavada, probing the Klishna Karma Bijas, probing the narratives that lie behind who it is that we've made ourselves up to be. Yogendra, great yogi, had a son called Jaydev. And when I first came to India in 1981, it was for a conference in Cochin. Very famous conference. It was one of the very first in the style of the Parliament of the World's Religions in 1893 rather, to be convened in India. And it was done by a priest. And I remember when I was there it was the first time I ever saw the people that build Akshardham, the Narayan Swami people. And they were so eye-catching, right? With their orange and their turbans and their marks. And then the Buddhists were there, and the Indian Christians were there, and the Muslims were there, and actually I was like 25. This is my professor's gift when I finished my PhD, was like, now you have to go to India. It was like, okay, and it was one of the most amazing events. And my roommate, and we were staying in these little guest houses all throughout Cochin. My roommate was the president of Muslim Polygar University. And I was a rather unkempt 25-year-old, and he really wanted me to trim it up, you know, the way the Muslims like that beard to be. Now my wife is always after me. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But my beard is more taken out. But I learned so much in that week-long event. And what I also encountered was a Jesuit who had studied at the Yoga Institute in Santa Cruz, Mumbai. And if you are ever passing through Mumbai, it's right by the airport. It's a place of historic importance. Dr. Yogendra had created in New York State in 1918 the Yoga Institute as an immigrant. Remember what I said about 1920? He came back to Mumbai, transferred his whole operation. It's been there ever since. So we're into more than 100 years. And one of their key people in the 1970s was a Jesuit priest who had become a great teacher of yoga in Santa Cruz. And he was at this conference, and he told me about this institute, gave me the pamphlet, and I said, oh, very good. And this had also been influential with my own professor, who very much took to heart the topic of Dr. Jaydev Yogendra's doctoral dissertation at Bombay University. And this was the bhāvas. Bhāva takes 8 forms, and here's the therapeutics. The place of emotionality and past impressions, sometimes referred to as the intellect, the buddhi, flavors and colors the outward flow of the mind and senses. Its bhavas determine the quality of human experience, moving in its simplified form as follows. For people of yoga to move from weakness towards strength, Aishwarya, from attachment to repose, Viraga, from ignorance to knowledge, Jnana, from viciousness to virtue, Dharma. The dance of Prakriti manifests through the 3 gunas, heaviness and lethargy, tamas, energy and passion, rajas, and buoyancy and illumination, sattva. Moving ever upward and forward with knowledge, one attains freedom. So that's something. Now, I'm going to sort of like bedtime style. Now, and thank you. It's wonderful having a yoga audience because I know you can do it. We used to have to sit in that ashram on the floor just like you're doing for 5 hours at a stretch, sometimes longer, and it's good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is switch over to the Yogavāsiṣṭha. But I'm going to share a very joyous story you can read along with. And the many young people in the room are probably in that place or about to be in that place when the grandparent passes. And the middle-aged people in the room are probably in that place where they're coping with aging parents. And then there's the remainder people like myself. And just in this period of 2 weeks, I'm missing the funerals for 2 colleagues and 2 dear associates from time ago. So this flow into life is inevitably interwoven with the passing of life. Many people think that reincarnation is a fanciful, useless way of engaging one's time. And this text that we've translated here as a group of us. This text gives a very different take from 1,000 years ago on why do we entertain the notion of the possibility of past lives. So Vasiṣṭha, the great sage, said this. Indeed, now they tell an old story about two brothers on the banks of the Ganges, said to be the two sons of the sage. Listen, O Ram, Yogavāsiṣṭha, Ram